how can you convert those emissions into something that could be usable?
Yes.
You can convert carbon emissions into something. You can have carbon in cement, carbon steel,
yes,
agriculture.
Yes.
Carbon dioxide.
Carbon is an important element, just not in the atmosphere. Let's talk about energy transition. We are all hearing about energy transition. I guess because of the pandemic, we have, and the oil and gas sector struggling. I guess struggling is saying it mildly, but that has gotten the discussion of ESG, environmental, and this whole energy transition discussion has happened, right? And you look at even some of the majors going through either judicial decisions or activists getting seats on their board or investors voting on certain initiatives. The majors have to now start thinking about energy transition, and the pandemic may have forced that. But what is the scope of energy transition for somebody who doesn't know what the term covers? What is energy transition?
Yeah, I think in very simple terms, it's transitioning from a dominant source of energy, you could say yes, oil, coal, to other forms of energy. And over the next, we're in 2021,
yes,
over the next 25, 30 years, it's yes, estimated that yes, we will have a more dominant form of other types of energy, yes, more renewable, more sustainable types of energy. And we're seeing shifts already take place. And I think the pandemic probably just magnified that in a variety of ways.
Yes, yes. And actually that is a question that goes through my mind is, hopefully the pandemic will be behind us. It already is. And we wake up in 2022 and this would have been an ugly nightmare.
Yeah.
When that happens, will the emphasis on energy transition continue in earnest? Or as oil and gas markets, if you were looking at oil prices, they were down today, but oil prices have been rising all year. And the expectation is they will continue to rise. So as Wood looks at its strategy, what are your customers saying? Is energy transition, I hate to put it this way, the flavor of the year, and then next year there is another flavor? Or is energy transition here to stay, where these companies are telling you they have fundamentally changed their way of thinking?
I would say energy transition is not a flavor of the day, month, or year. I think this is something that has been in the making for a long time. Yes. Because we have a more balanced portfolio,
yes,
it helps because we yes, have a wide client base, which is important. And I think we can support many different companies
yes,
in that. But if you think about ESG, energy transition, it has been around. It's just been magnified.
Yes.
And I was thinking about this. If you think of Q2, quarter two of 2020,
yes,
that was a defining, the end of the first quarter, beginning of the second quarter of 2020, very defining moment in all of our personal lives as well as industry.
Yes.
The pandemic has changed everything
yes,
for everyone. And for all of us in energy, we've been through a decade of downturns practically.
Yes.
And this one hit
yes,
pretty hard.
Yes.
So forever changing in the industry. Then you look at Q2 of 2021.
Yes.
Another very significant quarter of what took place. You have the IEA yes, communicating about net zero
yes,
by 2050, something very bold.
Yes.
About should companies really be making investment in oil and gas projects.
Yes.
So that was a very distinct report that came out. And then the increase in the shareholder activism.
Yes.
With many of the majors.
Yes.
So I think those 2 quarters were quite defining and only accelerate the attention on it. And I don't think it's going to revert. I think it'll just get some strength, but it's not easy to just accelerate energy transition. There's many factors, I think, at play, and how companies choose their own strategies are going to be very important.
Yes, and very well said, ma'am. Any transition is difficult. Mm-hmm. Energy transition is going to be challenging. And so as you look at energy transition, maybe not just from as an executive for Wood, but if you look at an industry and you're an observer of industry and perhaps even society, because you're not tied to a specific, to one industry sector, the oil and gas, for this energy transition to succeed, what do you think are the critical success factors? And let me qualify what I mean by succeed. When you go into organizations, when you go into companies start projects and initiatives. Yeah. And what you watch for is, does this have sticking power, right? Staying power. Will it stick? Will it fundamentally change things? Or will the project get forgotten, right? So energy transition is a critical project, if you will, for society. Mm-hmm. And when you look at that, what do you see as the critical success factors? You said these factors must fall into place, mm-hmm. so that 10 years from now, 20 years from now, we have made such significant progress.
I think that's the important. It has staying power. It's society. It's a purpose. Yes. I think people have to believe that there's a greater purpose in what we're doing. Yes. That we want to make sure that we do protect, where we live, the environment, and yes. leave it in a better yes. place. And yes. we know that we need to do some pretty, I would say, striking actions to help improve that.
Yes.
And many people will debate on the time, the degrees,
yes.
What's required, but
yes.
the focus on having a sustainable future, I think, is extremely important to many different generations. And people will accept that or participate at different paces.
Yes.
But I don't see a reverse taking place.
Yes.
Technology helps
yes.
with that. And when you have the cost of transitioning to something else come down, people will be more accepting as well. When something costs a lot more to switch, sometimes it's very hard to accept, even if it's for a greater good.
Yes.
And I think we're going to see that.
Yeah, I believe society is there. When I talk to younger folks, it's clear that they care about the environment, right? So they have a sensitivity and awareness of the environment that your and my generation did not have, right? I don't remember 30 years ago, we were not thinking about the environment. We were thinking about getting jobs and making money and building a family. We were not talking about environment. But when I talk to younger generation, they're talking environment. They are. So I think society is going to be there. The question is, how does the business community, how do executives, and how does the industry, what do we need the industry to succeed, right? Because there has to be, like any project, you need a certain coalition, you need a certain critical mass. So when I think about energy transition, I think about it and I say, what needs to come together for it to gain momentum and continue to grow?
Well, I think the other elements of kind of the sticking power is investment.
Yes.
Companies may not be able to get the investment that they need if they're not demonstrating that they're working differently.
Yes,
investment, the capital won't be there.
Yes.
Exactly. And that's a very, very important element. If you're not able to get the investment that you need because you're not demonstrating a certain responsibility. And that wasn't the case years ago. And so this is more relatively new. So investment banks are going to choose to lend their money to those companies that demonstrate more sustainability or socially responsible ways of operating. So that's something that's sticking.
So what you're saying is one critical success factor is going to be that the capital, the investors are going to become more selective in the companies that they invest. And they're going to use their capital to vote on how companies should, or what strategies and focus companies should develop. I like that. I like that point, because money makes the world go around.
Money talks.
Money talks, and loudly. Yes. What other factors, or maybe what are the risks? What do you see as the risk that could either delay energy transition or create obstacles? What do we as industry groups, what do we as companies need to think about? Because it is in our interest to succeed in this transition. One, because society is demanding it. But as you pointed out at the outset, oil and gas is a fuel source that has certain challenges. So either we have to figure out how to make that oil and gas source and manage the carbon that is generated, not just from operations. I had this question to one of the other speakers about the scope of energy transition, right? What does it mean for ESG specifically? Environmental social governance is what is the scope. It is not just the operations of the companies, but it is the carbon released, the emissions released from the consumption of the product, which is whether it is crude or whether it is gasoline or natural gas, is the net impact on the environment.
Absolutely.
And so the industry has to think about that. And so how do we minimize the net impact on the environment? And how do we make money from other sources of energy, renewable, right? And so how do we make that transition?
I think this is probably one of the more fascinating elements of it. Essentially, let's call it every public company. Say, or maybe I should qualify. Most public companies will be required to demonstrate their emissions. And now you have not only ESG requirements, but it's becoming more defined and people are becoming more educated about it. Scope 1, 2, 3 emissions. You're going to have to start reporting your emissions and how you're reducing them. It's going to be public information. So you have to be very certain in how you go about that. Now, reducing emissions is extremely important because that is part of, I think, a social responsibility. But, carbon emissions and carbon capture is a very fascinating topic, and one that you can help by reducing the emissions, which is important for sustainability and important for climate change. But how can you convert? How can you convert those emissions into something that could be usable? You can convert carbon emissions into something. You can have carbon in cement, carbon steel, agriculture. Carbon dioxide.
Carbon is an important element, just not in the atmosphere.
Not in the atmosphere. So how do you take it out of the atmosphere? And convert it into something that is purposeful and something that you can also make money from. So you achieve both.